Have you seen this man? This is Steve Moraff, owner and proprietor of Moraffware, a shareware software company that produced a series of games from the early 1980s all the way up until the early 2000s. These games are some of the weirdest looking things that you've ever seen, and it's a good example of games that really can only exist in this particular time period. This was before we had things like Unity and Unreal Engine that allowed amateur creators to make games that don't look amateur. But to me, that's kind of part of the charm of this time period. Is everyone was doing everything from scratch, making everything themselves. They didn't have any free assets or paid assets to tap into. They were creating everything from the ground up. And to me, that's what makes Moraffware something interesting to look at. So I'm going to take a deep dive into the strange world of Steve Moraff, who has his own lore associated with him outside of his games. He's quite an interesting individual, but we're going to take a look at his early games, which to me are the most interesting ones, and then take a quick look at his later games as well, which are still weird. So let's get into it. So first, let's address the elephant in the room. Most of what people remember about Steve Moraff is his signature nag screens included in his Windows shareware releases. These would usually show some real game screenshots along with some fuzzy pictures of himself, as was customary in the 90s shareware world. However, the most memorable part was his famous infamous voice line that would play on this screen.
Hi, I'm Steve Moraff. Please purchase these games.
And yes, it is Steve Moraff, not Moraff, like I was saying at the beginning of this video. Please forgive me. Seriously though, anyone notice how if you take an old picture like this and rotate it while zooming in ever so slightly, it instantly turns into a true crime documentary?
I still can't believe, after all these years, that he done did what he done did.
There were no survivors. Anyway, these nag screens would get even more obnoxious over time. Some of these would even self-proclaim that they're an annoying nag screen, take forever to go away, or launch another game when you close the first game. This was to encourage you to buy the game in the most douchey way possible. Let's go back to the beginning though, which is when I feel that Steve Moraff made his best games. So let's check out our first game, which is Moraff's Revenge, released in 1988. If I'm being honest, there aren't too many PC games from the 80s I find myself going back and playing these days. The main reason for this is the PC platform in the 1980s was just not really a gaming platform by any stretch of the imagination. Looking back at games that look like this really show how quickly the PC platform became much more suitable for gaming just a few short years later, thanks to the likes of Apogee, id, and Epic Mega Games. Looks can be deceiving though, since I found Moraff's Revenge to be a solid experience, even now. The game does use some admittedly nauseating 4-color CGA graphics, but at least allows you to swap palettes to give you varying degrees of ugly. Still, a free game in 1988, you can't really complain. So what type of game is it? Well, my favorite type, of course, a traditional roguelike dungeon crawler. There are some odd twists to the usual formula though, which we will get into. But let's start the game. Before you can start exploring, you need to create a character, and the game gives you a few different options. You have 4 races to choose from: human, dwarf, elf, and hobbit. After that, you take random dice rolls to generate your starting stats, which are the typical strength, intelligence, wisdom, health, and agility. There's also a laziness stat that just eats up some random skill points on each roll for some reason. After your stats are set, you have the choice of 2 classes, which are Fighter and Wizard. Pretty self-explanatory. The Fighter beats people up with fighting, and the Wizard beats people up with magic. So, after giving your character a super mature name, you're dropped into the starting town. And this is where you find things will go a bit off script from what you will find in your typical roguelike adventure. For one, the game is played from a 3D perspective, which takes a bit of getting used to since your character moves only in the direction they're facing. To be honest, I use the map to navigate and then just use the 3D windows to see the locations of monsters. If the game didn't have an auto map, I think it would be unplayable for this reason. I did figure out later on that you can toggle it to control more traditionally if you press the escape key, but you still have to use the 3D view to see enemies. Either way, it's quite hard to explain just how disorienting playing this game for the first time is. Surprisingly, muscle memory kicks in after a bit and it does start to make sense, but not for too long because this game is quirky like that. So there's some added complexity in some of the systems in place here that differ a bit from your average roguelike affair. For one, monsters and enemies you fight drop coins, but they aren't actually used as currency in the game. To buy new equipment or use healing services available in towns, you need to find a bank to convert the coins into jewelry. Oddly, the same goes with leveling. To advance levels from monsters you fight, you need to sleep at inns. It works quite a bit like Elder Scrolls Oblivion in that way. Another strange but welcome choice is how the inventory is streamlined. The best armor is automatically equipped when it's obtained, and instead of equipping weapons, you have hotkeys to use whichever one you want in battle without needing to switch. So if you'd rather use a mace, knife, or even your fist instead of your sword in the middle of battle, you have the choice to do so. This is a cool feature since certain enemies in the game have weaknesses to different types of weapons. As odd as some of these systems are, the game should be commended on how well it guides new players. Not only does the game have a very useful and well-written in-game help system, but hint messages push you in the right direction depending on the situation without being overly annoying or tutorial-like. For instance, if you enter an area you're out-leveled for, the game will warn you. This is just great game design compared to many of the games in the 80s and even the 90s that just throw you in the game with little explanation of what to do. It really shows how Steve wanted to create an experience that was more fun than frustrating. That isn't to say the game holds your hand. It's still difficult and has permadeath like a normal roguelike, but at least you'll pick up the basics quickly. As for an actual objective of the game, the help guide has a roundabout way of saying it doesn't really have one. I have to say, I'm really disappointed it's not about slaying an evil wizard named Moraff, because Moraff is a sweet evil wizard name. But as it stands, you basically just get as far as you can in the dungeon and find secrets. It's an open world, and it's quite fun, but it's far from story-driven and super complex. That said, the help guide hints at some cool secrets to find, and this game is overflowing with silliness and charm. It's easy to tell that this was a passion project for Mr. Moraff at the time, and the shareware model was a great way to get it in the hands of players. I still think $10 for the full game is a heck of a deal for something with this much replayability. This game is great, which is why I'm giving it the rating of 7 Moraff heads out of 10. Yeah, I have a Moraff head rating system, which I'll use for the remainder of this video. Thanks for asking. For our second game, we have Moraff's Pinball, released in the following year of 1989. So after that banger of a first game, we get this. This is one of the more awkward virtual pinball games I've ever played. It has unpredictable physics and an overly convoluted control scheme. You will notice there are 5 flippers on this strange looking table, and every one has its own key to trigger it. I guess this is so you have finer control in the event that you have multiple balls, but to me 5 keys to control a pinball game seems absurd. The game would make way more sense if you just had 2 keys to control the left and right side of the table, like, normal pinball. But this is Moraffware, and everything is always a bit off. I don't always mean that in a bad way, however, in this case, I kinda do. The bottom flippers are actually crooked too and misaligned for some reason, which makes aiming at specific targets almost impossible. The worst part is probably the physics though. The ball just seems to do whatever the heck it wants. It just seems to bounce everywhere, like its tops are made of the rubber and its bottoms are made of the spring, and it's not fun. To its credit, it does use some cutting-edge graphical modes and high resolutions for the time it was released, even if it does end up looking a bit cursed. Most other PC pinball games from this time period aren't much better though. Life in a pre-epic pinball world was tough, it seems. I give this 1 Moraff head out of 10. Not worth going back to. Next up we have Moraff's Blast, released in 1990. Again, we have some pretty impressive graphics modes on this one, with the ability of using an 800 by 600 resolution if you have a supported video card. We also see some of Moraff's now signature acid trip-like menu effects with explosive PC speaker sounds that will become a reoccurring theme in his later games. The game itself is a breakout-style brick-breaking game, and you can choose to play a game mode like the somewhat bland Atari game. However, the adventure mode is quite a bit more interesting. This mode gives you power-ups like catching, larger paddles, and multi-balls for some chaotic fun. Each level has specific blocks you need to strike before you can advance to the next level, and there seems to be quite a few screens. There's also a 2-player co-op mode that allows for simultaneous play with 2 paddles. For what it is, this game controls very solidly and has crisp and smooth graphics. If it was just a pure breakout clone, I would score it lower, but the adventure mode makes it a bit more fun. 4.5 Moraffs out of 10. Not bad. Next up we have a few games from 1991. The first one is Mather, or Mather, or Mather. Okay, it's Mather. Like the name implies, this is a math game that apparently was endorsed by Dr. Linda Albert, a child psychologist and writer. This program is a glorified flashcard game and allows you to practice basic math. The gimmick or incentive for doing so is that you get money for each problem you solve and can buy various virtual prizes. The prize list itself is hilarious, and for a game designed for children, has some interesting choices to say the least. For $500, you can get a huge win at Vegas. What kid doesn't love gambling? And hey, $3,000 for a 1,000-acre farm seems like a steal. Or you could buy a 50-foot tree for $750. Yeah, I don't know either. But seriously, what kind of kid would want some of this stuff? $270 for a romantic evening, and for $2 million, you can buy love? Just some life advice. If it costs you 2 million clams, it's not love, okay? Real love is way more expensive. Each prize will give you some ASCII art depictions of what you've earned, which is kinda cute, but that's about all this game has to offer. It's still better than the pinball though, so 2 Moraffs out of 10. Next up we have Flygame. This feels more like a tech demo rather than an actual game. You fly a plane over a randomly generated map and avoid crashing into mountains. That is literally the entire game, and thanks to my Matrox graphics card, I think, it runs like crap on this computer. In DOSBox it runs much better, but still isn't all that great as a game. It kinda seems like he wanted to make a shmup type game, but gave up halfway through. Just for the idea, we'll give it 1.5 Moraffs out of 10. Now for something a bit more interesting. This is Moraff's Entrap. This is the first game where Steve Moraff's eclectic design and graphic elements really come into focus. This is an absolutely wild looking game graphically. Like I mentioned at the onset of this video, you don't really see this type of scratch-made game design anymore. Making everything yourself from the ground up like this really gave amateur game design from this era a very distinct personality. It certainly does look interesting, but what is this game exactly? It's very similar to the 1985 mainframe ASCII game Robots, where each move you make, an enemy will advance in position and you must outmaneuver them. Entrap takes that original formula and switches it up a bit. The most obvious difference is that instead of a top-down perspective, you have this crazy looking 2.5D Rainbow Road grid. However, the main objective is different as well. While in robots the goal is to destroy all the enemies by forcing them to crash into each other, the goal here is to simply escape the level. While you cannot destroy or damage the robots, you can outsmart them by getting them stuck around holes, or blocking their path by removing or adding chunks of the terrain. You also have to contend with enemies of varying degrees of intelligence as you progress through the levels. You do get a mini-map in the upper left corner of the screen to navigate more easily and see the locations of off-screen bots. Still, this is a very difficult game, and to be 100% honest, I'm very bad at this particular genre of game in general, but I still know something well designed when I see it. It's quite fun to mess with and see how far I could get, even if that basically was just level 2. I give it 5.5 Moraff heads out of 10. But perhaps the most interesting thing about Entrap is some of the information that's contained inside of the menus. There's just some stuff in here that's so bizarre that I feel like I should mention. The first thing is there are sponsored endorsements of AMD's math coprocessors all over this game. I'm unsure if AMD paid him to put them here, or if he just really liked the products. Either way, it's strange to see in a shareware title. There's also all sorts of what appears to be wanted ads that Steve himself wrote into the section of the menu entitled Important People and Friends. These ads seem to cast a wide net around investors and people in various forms of media that he wanted to work with to write novels, screenplays for movies, and even music based around his games. The music would be from what he calls a fictional reality band called the Moraffians, who would play music that is a mixture of pop, rock, synth, and medieval music. I can't really tell if these are just an elaborate troll or serious requests, but they certainly are interesting. If this alleged demo tape for the Moraffians ever did exist, I certainly would love to hear it. But anyway, time to move on to our last game from 1991. So this is Moraff's World. After trying Moraff's Revenge, I was looking more and more forward to this one. Essentially, it's a rehash of that game with some added features and some of the more annoying things removed. However, the combat and magic system have been overhauled quite a bit, and there are now 8 races and 7 classes, all of which will affect your average starting statistic rolls. You can also now assign stat points manually at the start of the game if you wish to do so, and the silly laziness stat has been removed entirely. For my first run, I decided to play as a female imp wizard named Impedance. Do you get it? First thing you will notice is although the interface layout is largely similar to Moraff's Revenge, the graphics are quite a bit enhanced. The artwork seems to not be by Steve this time, but rather Rodney Page and Martin and Lori Noel. It's still extremely cursed, amateur, and absurd looking in the best way possible. I mean, look, this enemy is a freaking walking sword. You gotta love it. The colors, as usual, are an all-out assault on the senses, and unfortunately, this game still suffers from some awkward movement mechanics. The good news is that instead of all the hotkeys, you can use the mouse now as well, which makes some tasks and moving around easier. The mini-map, though, has gotten objectively worse this time, with a color-coded layout with very similar colors that makes ladders and key locations like stores, inns, and temples harder to distinguish, at least in my opinion. You do get used to it, but I liked how Revenge just used letters instead. That aside, this is a much more balanced game and is much wider in scope. There is an overwhelming number of skills and spells, and you can even venture outside of the already massive starting dungeon to explore an overworld called the Wilderness to find new areas. Oh, and did I mention you can rob the bank now too? Oh, well, maybe you actually can't, but the option is there. A good quality life improvement is the ability to buy a raise contract, which will protect you from death. However, it will increase in price each time you buy it, so it doesn't remove all suspense of what still is a permadeath roguelike. There also seem to be way more unpredictable trapdoors that will make things more perilous if you accidentally descend deeper into areas you aren't leveled for. Overall, this game is fantastic though, and makes me pretty excited to try the final Moraff dungeon game coming up, but for now, I give this 9 Moraffs out of 10. With that, let's check out our next slew of Moraff games released in the year 1992. Like 91, Steve Moraff would be rather busy and would release 4 more games during the course of this year. Unfortunately, none of them are really any good. First, we have Moraff's Monster Bridge. This is a card game. Shareware and their card games, they don't have a good history with me, but anyway, this is a weird, twisted game of bridge. Apparently, the monsters in the Moraff cinematic universe play this game at the tavern. It's an unnecessary lore dump for reusing artwork, but I can respect it. Although, the README states that Monster Bridge has better graphics than any card game ever produced, including Solitaire for Windows. These graphics are terrifying. Why is everything outlined in green? Is this what I imagine a bad acid trip looks like if you're colorblind or something? As for the game itself, it's okay, I guess. I'm not much of a card person, so I'm not going to give it a Moraff head rating. It seems alright enough if you like cards, but let's just move on to something else so I can get these eldritch visions out of my head. So next we have Monster Memory. Hey, wait a minute. Steve, no, put that away. You're better than this. You don't need to resort to the shovel. Hey, no, put it down. Ugh. So yes, this is yet another asset reuse from Moraff's world in the form of a match game. It's as you would expect. Let's move on, shall we? The next one can't possibly be. He did it again. Steve, why? So this is Moraff's Mahjongg. It's just Mahjongg, again with the graphics from Moraff's world. This isn't great, and the tile sets are beyond hideous, but Mahjongg would prove to be a Moraffware staple in the future, as we'll get into later, so I guess this is a somewhat important milestone for him. However, it's also one of the worst games. 1 Moraff out of 10. And this brings us to our last game of the sorry year of 1992, which is Moraff's Stones. This is sort of a reskin of Monster Bridge as a trading gambling game. You trade stones of different values to AI opponents, and whoever ends up with the most valuable stones at the end wins. The game starts with a very foolish AI that is replaced with more intelligent opponents as you knock the stupid ones out of the game. The game is kinda meh to me and is a boring concept. There's supposedly an enhanced edition with digital voice quips and insults from the monsters, which I think would make it more interesting, but I was unable to find this online. As it stands, it's okay for what it is. 3 Moraffs out of 10. So with the lackluster year of 92 out of the way, what does 93 bring? Well, 3 more games. First up we have Temp-Tris, which, if you can't tell from the name, is a Tetris-style game with a few different game modes. And boy, this might be the ugliest one yet. The controls are also kind of sticky compared to most Tetris-type games, and it doesn't really feel all that good to play. There's actually a separate game bundled inside this one called Blockade that I feel is much better than the main event here. This game is similar to Rodent's Revenge or Crusher Castle, and you push blocks around to trap enemies. It's not amazing, but the graphics are smooth and it controls well. It should be noted at this point that these particular games appear to be published by Steve Moraff or Moraffware rather than programmed completely by him. Temp-Tris seems to credit Martin Noel, who did some of the work in Moraff's world, and Blockade credits someone named Logan Gilbert. I should note that Noel is credited in Monster Bridge and Stones as well, so he may be more responsible for the shovelware type titles released. Only Steve knows that for sure, probably. But how many Moraffs for Temp-Tris and Blockade? Well, collectively, 4 out of 10 Moraffs. Blockade is okay, but Temp-Tris itself isn't very good. Moving on to our next game, we have Moraff's Escapade. The graphic style in this one is quite a bit more reserved than usual, and the game itself is a Lode Runner clone. The controls are good, and it plays pretty well for what it is. In 1996, he released an enhanced edition of the game for Windows 95 with updated visuals and sound effects that is much better overall. There really isn't much to say about it otherwise. It's just kind of what you see is what you get. However, the Windows version contains some extra weirdness in the form of a strange manifesto explaining his political views he wants you to support. He also mentions a publication of his entire agenda called The Optimist he was gathering support for. Much like the novels, movies, and music he was gathering agents for in '91, I don't think anything ever became of this. It certainly is something I've never seen outright promoted in a game before, and I guess builds on his ever-growing lore. He certainly tried a lot of things, that's for sure, but as far as Escapade goes, I'll give it 5 Moraffs out of 10. Maybe 6 Moraffs out of 10 for the Windows version. It's pretty good. Next, we have the last game of the year 1993, which is Moraff's Dungeons of the Unforgiven. Apologies in advance for the graphics on this one. I couldn't get the game to look right on any of the graphics modes I tried. If I loaded in EGA mode, the characters look right, but the environment looks wrong. And if I loaded in VGA mode, the environment looks correct, but the artwork looks funny. Considering most of the screenshots online look like this too, it must be a common issue. Either way, it doesn't affect gameplay, so onward we go. This is the final dungeon crawler that was released by Moraffware, and unsurprisingly, it is similar to the first 2 games. However, I'm a bit conflicted if everything done here is an improvement from Moraff's world. There's definitely some good and some bad. The races from the last game have all been switched out from typical D&D type stuff like elves and dwarves to some really whacked out stuff. For example, Hobo, Childman, Shrimp, and Midget are now playable races. While World was not a game to be taken seriously either, Dungeons of the Unforgiven is quite a bit more meme heavy. For instance, the low value coins from the last game are now American dollars that you can convert to rubles at a very low conversion rate. Anyway, for the first run, I decided to play as a hobo mage. Right off the bat, the 3D view is greatly improved and much more usable than the previous 2 games. However, one thing I really dislike now is how obnoxious the tutorial tips now are. Instead of being unobtrusive hints like the previous game, now giant text boxes disrupt the flow of the game and interrupt you repeatedly with the same messages. The wilderness exploration has also been culled from the game in lieu of one-way teleporters that take you to new levels. These can really screw you over if you walk into them early game like I did, and end up being in a zone that completely outlevels you with no way to return. Another thing that makes this game more tedious, for no reason, is the fact that you now grow older and lose stat points when you stay at inns. The only way to avoid this is to pay for something called culture shock points, which will be used up each time you stay at an inn. The really unfortunate part is the cost of these points increases every time you go up a level, so it gets more and more difficult not to lose experience every time you stay at an inn. I assume this is to prevent cheesing leveling from the same area, but the game is already brutally hard as is. The raise contracts have also been removed this time, so aside from cheating, there's no escape from permadeath. One thing that does keep things a bit more interesting is now different levels of the dungeon are broken up into what the game calls sections. These sections have specific races and creatures that inhabit that area. At any point, you can get info on what creatures inhabit the section you're in by looking at the section info menu. Aside from these changes, the gameplay loop mostly remains the same as Moraff's world. You fight, sleep to level up, explore, and become more powerful. This is still a really good RPG that I can't believe I waited this long to try. I'm not going to rate it as high as World personally, but most find this to be a better game. For me though, it's 8.5 Moraffs out of 10. Following the release of Dungeons of the Unforgiven, Steve Moraff went into a different direction and started producing games for Windows. While some of these were remakes or remasters of his older games like Escapade and Pinball, what really popped off for him were puzzle games, and more specifically, Mahjongg. I'm not going to go into a deep dive of every Windows game he created because in the end, most of these are just simple games and there isn't much to say about them. Instead, I'm going to go over the vibe these had, and then show a bunch of them in action to finish off the video. One I do want to mention specifically by name is Flygame. This was the first Moraff game I remember seeing, and the design is still so striking. These big weird 90s ray trace stones, odd backgrounds, and most notably the sounds and music. The sound effects on these are somehow both nostalgic, surreal, and a bit creepy. If you've ever played Hypnospace Outlaw, which is a retro internet simulator experience, I can't help but think the Moraff games from this era were a bit of an inspiration for it. Whatever the case may be, there's something about these games that sticks in your dreams and nightmares. It almost feels like an art form that's still never been pulled off in the same way, and likely won't again, at least so effortlessly. I do know I'm talking about just some random Mahjong games, but seriously, if you played these, they just kind of stick with you for some reason. And they were wildly successful. Judging by how many physical copies of Moraff's Mahjong games are floating around eBay these days, it seems like he did very well for himself during the height of popularity of computer Mahjong. As of 2025, you can still buy the latest version of his basic Mahjong game on his website for $50, which runs on modern Windows. Unfortunately, all his older titles are no longer up for sale, but are easy enough to find on the interwebs. As for the man himself, he seems to keep a pretty low profile online, and there isn't much info about what he's doing these days. Somehow, that mysterious aura seems fitting, all things considered. Well, this video was a process, so I hope you like it. I will leave the video off now here with my list of supporters and some soothing sounds and sights of Steve Moraff. I'll see you guys next time.
Loading. Please wait. Welcome to Ringjong.
Sorry. Fascinating. Nice.
Cool.
This game took 89 moves. Doom. Doom.
Sorry. Sorry.
This game took 49 moves.